And again, you know, the ones that benefit are usually the ones whose consent, support the state needs. The rule of law, which was supposed to protect us against this sort of exploitation by the state, has been basically subverted by the state. And often laws now are more designed to protect the state than they are designed to protect the individual against the state. And this is so true that even the Chinese government has understood this. And if you read the declarations of the Chinese government, you know, whether they are censoring the internet or shooting on the crowd, or before they have to shoot, you know, controlling everybody so tightly that no crowd can form, they actually now use the language of the rule of law. I have a beautiful example here, but there are many. When the Nobel Peace Prize dissident Liu Xiaobo was granted the Nobel Peace Prize, the official Chinese-run news agency said it was, I quote, a desecration of the rule of law. So you know they have learned, and of course they have learned their vocabulary well. You know, if you want to oppress the people efficiently, you just try to do it with the rule of law. While the rule of law was supposed to protect the individual against the state. Another way in which the state has become a Leviathan, which is a powerful organization to which nobody can resist, in the sense that Thomas Hobbes thought it should exist, is in the field of surveillance. There was a French police chief in 1759 whose name was Sartine. He was the first national police chief in France, national police having been created by Louis XIV, who apparently said to Louis XIV, "Sir," and I'm quoting, you know, what is reported. Nobody had a phone to record him at the time, but it is reported to have said, "Sir, when three people are chatting in the street, one of them is surely my man." End of quote. The idea being that the state did not like people to get together to conspire, and especially, of course, to conspire against itself. So, and of course, when lots of things are forbidden, you know, conspirations are everywhere, and the state has to exert constant surveillance. Now, mind you, the state already had to exert surveillance in order to give the people all these nice social programs, because how do you want to help everybody if you don't know what's everybody's situation, how much they are earning, what's their health situation, and so on and so forth. And of course there have been reasons added to this. The so-called war on terror has been a reason added for the constant surveillance of what we can call the surveillance state. ID papers have been ID papers, which were basically unknown on this continent 40 years ago, have been growing to the point where you can't have government-issued photo ID anymore. And this is all tied in the United States now with the Social Security number, which means that it does give a key to the state, to government, to anything that's in government databases. Again, the war on terror has been a convenient excuse for increasing again the surveillance state. The TSA is sort of the visible part of the iceberg, and the fact that people submit to this is, I think, very revealing. Of course, you cannot. Well, you know, that's what Thomas Hobbes said. You cannot fight the state. You know, it is so powerful that it's going to break the will of anybody. So nobody can fight the TSA, except if he's willing to, at the very least, miss his flight, or at worst to go to jail. But that not enough people criticize this to make it politically impossible is, I think, in itself very revealing. And, it might be, again, a demand phenomenon that people do want to be controlled, or that some people do want to be controlled, which is, again, an interesting phenomenon because the way we present libertarian ideas might be different, fundamentally different. If, on the one hand, the situation you have is a situation where everybody wants individual liberty and is willing to fight to death for his own liberty, and if, on the other hand, on the contrary, the situation is one where a large number of people are actually quite happy to be taken in charge, and are actually not happy to be searched by the TSA because somebody important is taking an interest in their little person, and their own bodyguards are there for them and will go up to searching them in order to protect them. Okay. Now, one thing we could. How am I doing for time now?
You wanted a 20-minute warning. It's 20 minutes.
Okay. Okay, rapidly, I have a last section on whether we can say that Leviathan is not Leviathan if it's democratic. Now, Jan has covered some part of what I'm saying, but I'm going to add a few points and perhaps repeat some of the things that Jan has said. See, because we could argue that we are Leviathan, we just love ourselves, which is why we take care of ourselves and we can't harm ourselves. The problem when we say we, or this us, is that it has no ascertainable meaning. Who is we and who is us? We can be the majority, and then you have the tyranny of the majority. When we say that we take care of ourselves and we control ourselves and regulate ourselves, it means then that the majority takes care of itself and controls the rest. And this is what Tocqueville called the tyranny of the majority. Even if the majority is not ferocious, it's going to impose its own preferences on the minority. Like, people who don't like drugs impose their preferences on people who like drugs. People who don't like smoking impose their preferences on people who like smoking. So apparently we have to make some magic. Actually, it's a trick. If a speaker doesn't make people laugh often enough, you have to laugh from time. Often, actually, in our modern democracies, under our modern Leviathan, we are ruled not by a tyrannical majority, but by tyrannical minorities. Individual voters, have zero impact on the result of an election, so they remain rationally ignorant, and this leaves place for organized interests who have a big stake in small issues to actually get benefits from the state at the expense of everybody else. You have many examples. The standard example is the farmers who are very heavily subsidized or protected in most of the industrialized world. You have, of course, subsidized companies, and we've seen lots of them during the recent economic crisis. And you have one very important minority, which is exerting a lot of power within Leviathan, and therefore on ruling the majority. It's a very important minority. Who is this minority?
Seniors.
Government employees.
Yes, bureaucrats, government bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are in Western countries something like between 15% and 20% of the workforce. It means that one person out of 5 or 6, or perhaps 7 if you want to be totally prudent, has actually a direct and continuing interest in not only the maintenance of the state, but the growth of state power. So this is the best organized minority and the most powerful minority as far as our Leviathan is concerned. It's much more their Leviathan than it is our Leviathan.
Do that, but they're teaching our kids.
Yes. And there is another reason and I'm going to go quickly through this, but since nobody ever mentions it, I'm always tempted to come back to this. There is another reason why, when we say we, talking about the people, or Leviathan, our Leviathan, we are Leviathan, there's another reason why this we doesn't have any meaning. And it is that if you, well, to put it simply, is that this we can be inconsistent. Even with all individuals being consistent in the sense of having transitive preferences. You prefer A to B and B to C, therefore you prefer A to C. Right? You prefer wine to beer and beer to water, therefore you prefer wine to water. Despite everybody being consistent in this sense, the majority, voting majority, might be inconsistent, might end up preferring A to B, B to C, but then C to A. And that's a phenomenon that was discovered actually by Condorcet, was a mathematician and philosopher in the late 18th century. It was rediscovered by Charles Dodgson, who was also Lewis Carroll, but who in civilian life was a mathematician. And it was rediscovered, that's in the 19th century, it was rediscovered again in the 20th century by Duncan Black, who was an American economist. Duncan Black writes that when he discovered this in the middle of the 20th century, he says that, I quote, stomach revolted in something akin to physical sickness. And of quote, he had discovered simply what had been discovered 2 centuries before, is that you could have people voting on alternatives, each individual being consistent and getting an inconsistent result at the end. So, and you know, it is a mathematical, demonstrable fact. And actually, it's only
What do you call that principle or that phenomenon?
It's called the paradox of voting.
Paradox of voting.
Yes, but it's called also transitive majorities. You know, because transitive majorities, you know, they will prefer A to B and B to C and then C to A. And what's even more important is that it is. This is only a special case of what a major 20th century economist, whom you have never heard about if you have listened only to Austrian economists, but I'm going to reveal you his existence, Kenneth Arrow, discovered. He wrote a book in, I think it was 1950, Social Choice and Individual Values, where he showed mathematically, which is the most Austrian logical way, as it were, to demonstrate something. He showed mathematically that there is no way to consolidate preferences from all individuals in a group and end up with quote, social preferences, unquote, that would lead the group to act as if it were an individual. So any social preferences, and you can in this context interpret this as any result of a vote, but it could be any social decision procedure. So any result of the vote or any social decision procedure is going to be either imposed by some of the people in the group, or it will not represent the preferences of everybody, or there are going to be some people who are going to be excluded from the result. In other words, if you want to have, that's simplifying a lot, but if you want, coming back to our former example, if you want to have social choices, political choices that are consistent, you know, that makes sense. You know, you don't, for instance, vote for the minimum wage and then vote for government money to subsidize or to create jobs, because, you know, that's inconsistent. So if you don't want these inconsistent results, you have to have some dictator who's going to impose it, to just, you know, push aside one of the alternatives.